All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of our Algebra 1 virtual tutor. And in this one, we're going to look at Objective 34. Now, in Objective 34, you see we're going to take a pretty dramatic departure from what we've done throughout the course. Now, throughout the course, it's been mostly algebraic skills, hence Algebra 1. But a secondary portion of Algebra 1 is statistical analysis. So in 34, we're going to start that a little bit. Now, what we have, we know a little bit of statistics to begin with, and probably the easiest way to look at this is in the context of you guys as a class take a test. And on that test, 30 of you are in a class, so 30 of you have taken the same test. What can you tell me about the scores? And the most common thing you guys are actually told is the class average. That's known as the mean. You take all of the scores, add them up, and divide by 30, in this case, the total. But you think about it, back in probably middle school, you also learned there was something called the median, the mode, the range. And that's what we're going to start to talk about here. Yes, at any time you could be asked to find the average or, something else, the mode. What we're concerned with here is let's take those 30 test scores and sort them from least to greatest. So I'm actually, before we get into what we're doing here, I'm going to go to this page. And let's start with, let's condense our example of our test scores, and let's condense it into its very simplest form, which would be 5 scores. So let's say one person got, I don't know, let's say it was, somebody probably got a 0. And then what's the highest score somebody could get? Probably all the way up here, they could get 100. So there's my low and the high score. And usually that tends to be the case on most tests. You figure somebody wasn't here, was absent, got a 0. And then, usually somebody's going to get 100. Now, in between 0 and 100, some other scores could probably happen. So let's just throw out a few scores. Let's say, I don't know, let's say somebody got an 80. And let's say there was probably, a 95 here. And let's say most of the scores were up there, 80, 95, 100. You had the kid that wasn't there, so they got a 0 because they haven't done it yet. And there's probably another score that's low, let's say like 35 or something. So these are the 5 scores in this class that we've condensed down to 5. Now, we've ordered them least to greatest. I'm not concerned about average again. What we're concerned with in this section is the distribution and the orderness of the scores. Now, what I mean by orderness kind of a weird word. We have 5 values here. We have the lowest value. We have the highest value. We have the very middle value. This is called the median. The median, if I order them from least to greatest, is the very middle value. What are these 2 green values then? I guess I should have keep this as median. Well, the green values are the middle of the middle. So this 35 represents the median between 0 and 80. It's called the first half median. And this one is the median of the second half. Now think about what those 3 values do. They divide this up into quarters. So we're going to call this the first quarter, the first quartile. And we're going to call this the third quarter. And it's taking our data and dividing it up into fourths. What's really going on? 1/4 of the data, and I guess I probably want to write this as 1/4. 1/4 of the scores are between 0 and 35. 1/4 of the scores are between 35 and 80. 1/4 of the scores are between 80 and 95. And 1/4 of the scores are between 95 and 100. And this paints a much different picture of our class than just the class average. Because it tells me, again, we can extrapolate this to our class of 30. It tells me that instead of just saying that the class average here was probably, add them up, divide by, let's say, probably 60. Because that 0 will drag it down quite a bit. Rather than say that, how would you feel if I said half of the class scored above an 80? How would you feel if I said 75% of you scored above a 35? Or only a quarter of you were between a 35 and a 0? Think of it this way. If I said half of you got a B or higher, that looks a lot better than saying, oh, the class average was a 50. And that's what we're concerned with here. In this objective, I'm not concerned with the average. I'm concerned with where are the most of the data values around. Are most of the scores up on top, like in this one, or are most of the scores down low? Not where they all are divided by total. This is called a 5-number summary, because there's 5 numbers. The 5-number summary consists of the low and the high, the 2 quartiles, and the median. I can go one step farther and find the range, which is high minus low. And I'm also going to be able to find something called the IQR, which is the interquartile range, or just the quartiles range, which is Q3 minus Q1. So I get a couple of ranges and a couple of values there, because the interquartile range will tell me where is the middle half of the class. Was the middle half of the class all passing? Well, then, obviously the upper half is also passing, so I'm good to go. We'll go one step farther, and this data can be visually presented as a box and whisker plot. So let's go back now and take a look at this. Our 5-number summary is a descriptive statistic that provides information about a set of observations. It is the 5 most important sample percentiles: minimum, lower quartile, median, upper quartile, and maximum. Okay. It's important because the lower, the upper, and the median but this lower quartile, or I'll abbreviate it Q1, is the median. It's the middle between the minimum and the median. And the upper quartile, abbreviated Q3, is the middle value between the median and the maximum. And what we're going to do, we're going to work with this 5-number summary, and then we're going to draw a box and whisker and interpret that box and whisker. So let's start off with just the idea of this quartiles, because what I'm giving you here is I'm telling you that the minimum is 10, the median's 25, and the maximum is 32. What I'm missing, and what your job is to find, is the other 2 numbers of my summary. And this is just kind of getting us to understand that Q1 and Q3 are the medians of the median. So how do you find a median? If I've got 2 numbers, I want the middle number. Well, We add them up, divide by 2, if I don't have any other data sets. So 25 plus 10, divide by 2, 17.5. Oops. And 32 plus 25, divide by 2, is 28.5. Those are the exact halfway points between those two values. Now, this is only the beginning. Remember, we're going to actually find these values. So we're going to list the values least to greatest and actually circle it. This is what you do when you don't have it. You find the average between the two. Okay. Now, what we're going to do with these, once we have our 5 numbers, is we're going to draw a box. I don't like that. Come on. Let's try that again. A box and whisker plot. And I ran out of room again. Come on. Let's try this one more time. Box and plot. There we go. All right. So it's a visual, it's a graphical representation of this same summary. And it's actually much easier to read when we have the graph, because the key is the box is actually representing where that middle half is. Now, our summary visually puts that. So this here, this is my low value. This is my high. And the whole key is that it's putting a box around the middle 50%. So this is Q1, median, also known as Q2, and then the third quartile, Q3. So it's visually putting around, this is where my middle set of data is. Then when I give a test, the middle 50% of the scores in this case are between 20 and 70. Okay. Think about that. Rather than say the class average was something here, I tell you that half of you scored between 20 and 70. This tells me a lot more about what's going on. Only 25% of you scored between a 70 and 90. Only a quarter of the class got a C or higher. 0 of you got an A. Doesn't this start to tell us a little bit more about our data than simply the class average? I think it does. Now, looking in more detail, it also tells us the lowest 25, or that 50% of the class scored less than a 50. Wow. All of these just by visually looking at our box and whisker. All right. So, basically, our job is to compare values or look at 2 values from 2 different graphs. We can't do much of it until we actually understand how to construct it. Now, here's one thing. I advocate a lot of doing things by hand because it's important that you understand why things work. You'll notice that in most of these videos on these virtual tutor, we're not trying to rely on a calculator to do things because 1, you might not have a calculator, but 2, it's important to understand why the calculator is doing what it does. And the same is true here. It's important to understand, before we get into what the calculator can do for us, it's important to understand what we're going to do here. So, oops. Okay. What is my calculator going to do? Well, in this case, I need to find those 5 numbers. And the easiest way to find those 5 numbers is to put these in order, least to greatest. Okay, so when I look at my numbers, wow, look at us. They're already in order. So when I look here, 17 is the lowest. Yep, and 100's the highest. So now we can start to work with this. Right there is our low value, and right here is our high value. Now, what's the median? Remember, the median is the middle number. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The median's not a number listed here. The median is between those two numbers. So when it doesn't come in right on the dot, we actually are going to find the average there. 74 plus 82 divide by 2. And I get that in this case, try to make this a little clearer for you all, the median is 78. Now, median of medians. Well, right here is my median, kind of right in the middle, right? So the middle number between here and here is going to be 70. That's Q1. Wow. I'm going to get too much in there if I try to label everything. And the median between 78 and 100 is 100. This is going to come out a little weird. That's okay. So there's my 5 numbers. Now, to actually use this to construct a box and whisker, we start off with a number line. We need our box and whisker to actually be, I don't know how much I like that number line. My smartboard's trying to act up a little bit, so there we go. All right. So let's start off, and I guess we'll start off with 10. And the highest is 100, so let's go to 110. All right, so I'm going to count this by tens. I'll probably need to adjust a little bit. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. So you can see I'm off a little bit. 100, 110. There we go. Wow. Wish I could. It's not going to let me do all that. That's unfortunate. Really want to just kind of drag that, and I don't like that. So let's start it right here. All right, so we're going to go, this is 10. All right. We'll go all the way out here. So 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110. There we go. Okay. Phew. You'll notice I'm taking care so I can get this. This doesn't have to be exact with a ruler. I mean, yours probably could. I'm trying to do it on a smartboard. But I'm taking care to at least get this somewhat to scale. The whole point is that your box and whisker is to scale. Now, where does 17 fall? Well, it's between 10 and 20. So I'm going to make a point right here, and I'm going to do my best to try and get that at 17. My next number isn't until 70. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. And there's my next point. I need to get to 78. So that's roughly here. And this one's going to be interesting because the top two numbers are actually both at the same spot. That's okay. Now, the middle 3 is where my box is. So we draw a box around the middle 3 numbers. And we put a little line to represent the median. And then we connect the whiskers like so. Now there's no whisker out here to connect, so I don't worry about that. Now we can kind of fill it in and try to make it at least look a little better. You'll know I'm doing this on a smartboard, so this gets a little tough. But right there is my box and whisker. That's all we're doing. The bottom scale is simply so I can keep my box organized. You can't just put a box and whisker and not have the points and the proportions correct. So this bottom number line is simply so I can get an idea of what's going on. Now, we go through that exercise, and we're going to have you do it a couple more times. But mostly what we're doing is interpreting a box and whisker. So on this one, it's important that we go through drawing it so that we can really understand how to interpret it. And what are we going to do here? Well, This is test score, so this is what we've been talking about. What's the highest score on this test? Well, the highest score was 102. And it's simply a matter of interpreting it. What was the lowest score? The lowest was 38. 3/4 of the class scored above a 72. That means only 25% of the class scored a D or F. That's the type of data that our box plot really helps. And that's actually, I answered number 2. What percent of the class scored above a 72? 75% scored above a 72. Now think about that. Doesn't that make you feel better when I say 3/4 of you scored a C or higher than if I had said the class average was a 50? What's the median? Well, the median's 88. And what percent be scored between an 88 and 96? 88 and 96, 25. Okay. So there's interpreting. So we've drawn our own. We've now interpreted. What's coming next? Well, now we want to compare two. Now, this one is pretty intense. So we're comparing two. And this is two different teams and their basketball points. So this is comparing two different teams. And what I want to know, how many games did they score 55 or more points? Well, look at Team A. Team A is going to be easier because right here and up is 55 points. And actually, Team B is not that bad either. Right here. But our job is to put a number of games between that. So for Team A, here's the key. Team A is 14 games. So if I have 14 games, 50% of them have to be bigger than the median. So what's 50% of 14? That's telling me that 7 of these games are higher than this median. And I'm sorry, that's actually, my bad. I was looking at the bottom one. Right here, 50%, which translates to 7 games. Now, that's all going to be backwards. So let's go ahead and try that again, because I combined the two. So let's just start that over. Let's start right here. What was my problem to begin with? This is not 50%. This is 75%. 75% of the games have to be greater than that. Now, what is 75% of 14? Comes out to 10.5. Well, I can't have a half game. So what that says to me is that right here, let's go ahead and divide this up a little harder. Right here at the median, there were 7 and 7 here. Now, what's the median of the median? Says there has to be 3, 3, and 1 game right there at 55. So, how many games are 55 or more? There's 1, 3, and 7. So that means there are 11 games total where they scored greater than 55. If I said, well, greater than or equal to 55. If I had said just greater than, I wouldn't have counted this one right here. Okay, now let's look at Team B. Team B, I need to know 50% because it's from the median up. So what's 50% of 13? Well, that's 6.5. So think about what's happening again. There's 6 values here, 6 here, and 1 right at the median. Well, because I want 55 or more, we're going to add this up, and there's going to be 7 total bigger than 55, which means all combined, there are 18 total. Now, that's pretty complex. And it's easily the hardest part of this is being able to go from number of values to totals here. I'm going to, like so. So it's important to look at that, but that can take a little time. In number 6, we're also comparing, but now it's a much easier comparison because I just want to understand the value of this interquartile range, which is the size of the box from here to here. So these two have the same 50% mark. Oops. Okay, so there's our 3 things. Can we draw a box and whisker? Can we compare 2 or 3? Or can we just interpret 1? Now, I did promise you that we would take a look at what our calculator can do for us. So I want to go back to this example. In this example, they were already in order, so it didn't make a whole lot of sense to use a calculator, and there weren't that many numbers. But we can enter this, and it's a good idea to play around with our calculator because it can verify things, and it can help us solve things. So let's bring up our calculator. And we're going to go to the statistic menu again. And we're going to enter our data. Now, because we're not doing 2 variable statistics, this is all going to go in right here. And not 10. There we go. And we're going to go to Stat, Calculate. Remember, these are all of our regression equations, but now we're going to do 1 variable stat. And we'll hit Enter. And this brings up quite a bit of information. So we want to go through all of this because it'll help us here, but it's also going to help us a little later on. So it's good to know all of these. So I'm going to put them all here. And actually, I can scroll down and get a whole other set of information. So this is quite a bit of stuff. Now, what do we have going on here? I'm going to go through all of these because this will kind of segue, and it's good to understand this menu. But I think you can probably see what's going on. Here's my minimum, median, maximum, Q1, and Q3. So right there is my 5-number summary. And you can see this says my 5-number summary was incorrect. It says that should have been 65.5. So do I agree with that? And I actually do. Here's what happened on my median. I counted from the wrong thing. So let's go ahead, kind of get rid of these. These are incorrect. My medians here, what's the middle of the middle? It's actually right here. There and there. Those 2 spots are my median. So this was okay. This was still 100. But here I actually had to find the average, 65.5. Very good. So we did this on purpose, obviously, because, whoops, get rid of this. Smartboard's not cooperating too much. Because we want to verify on our calculator. Now, that middle 65.5 means right here, this had to change. And it's actually going to come down to 65 points. It's actually going to come right about here. Not quite, but there we go. Whoops. There's our new box and whisker. So you can see it expanded the box a little bit. Now, going back to the 5-number summary. So right here, this is my 5-number summary. the first menu, there's a couple of key things. But for right now, this is the average, and this is the number of values that I entered in. And we're going to leave it at that I can get the average, the mean, median, the mean, the median. I can't get the mode. I can get the range by doing high minus low, and I can get interquartile range. All right. That will conclude this video. Again, feel free to go back to it as you wish, and we'll see you in an upcoming episode. Good luck.